Let's jump right into this explainer. Imagine, just for a second, two totally different realities violently colliding in one place. On one side, you've got this staggering, massive democratic exercise. Literally 68 million people stepping out to shape their future. But shadowing over all of that, there's this chilling juxtaposition of a tragic, visceral hospital murder that just shook the entire nation to its core, right? This is West Bengal in 2026. We're looking at a state where the democratic process and deep systemic fractures have slammed together to create an unprecedented political pressure cooker. The current situation, it honestly feels like it's fundamentally breaking. So today, through the data and the facts, we're going to unpack exactly why that is.
350,000. Let that number sink in. That's the sheer scale of armed security personnel, actual soldiers, deployed across West Bengal just to oversee this election. I mean, think about that for a second. You're looking at the need for a literal small army simply to make sure a democratic vote can even take place on April 23rd and 29th. It immediately sets the stakes, doesn't it? We're not just talking about your everyday routine civic duty here. We're looking at a current situation of intense, palpable volatility, where basic safety is this immense logistical hurdle.
And honestly, that volatility is perfectly captured by Congress leader Adhir Ranjan Chowdhury. He bluntly stated, "Polling in Bengal is not possible without violence." Wow. When a major political figure just accepts violence as an inherent feature of voting, you've really got to ask yourself, how did the climate get this desperate? To really grasp the gravity of that quote and the current state of affairs, we need to look backwards before we can look forwards. Because, this tension didn't just appear out of thin air. It's the culmination of a decade and a half of the incumbent state rule.
Section 1. 15 years of rule. So let's rewind 15 years. Back in 2011, Mamata Banerjee and the Trinamool Congress, the TMC, swept into power, and their political agenda for the state was built on one single, incredibly powerful promise: Poriborton, which is Bengali for change. They promised a fresh start for a state that felt tired and broken. Yet, when we contrast that hopeful 2011 promise with the reality of 2026, well, we're seeing a very different picture. Today, voters are openly asking what exactly changed. They're finding themselves face-to-face with widespread allegations of corruption, economic stagnation, and honestly, a pervasive sense of stolen futures.
So the crucial point really boils down to these specific grievances. We're seeing thousands of young Bengalis packing up and leaving the state every single year, simply because the jobs just aren't there. And for the ones who do stay, the system often feels totally stacked against them. There are claims of government recruitment exams being allegedly rigged, and positions reportedly being sold off to the highest bidder. And then, layered right on top of all this economic desperation, is this repeating, vicious cycle. We're talking booth capturing, clashes between party workers, and daytime violence during every single election cycle. Now, sadly, this has been the story of Bengal for a while, but this particular election year feels remarkably different. And the reason for that is rooted in an event that fundamentally shifted the emotional core of the entire state. Let's take a second to look at a wound that has simply refused to heal.
Section 2. A wound unhealed. In August 2024, a 31-year-old woman, a doctor who had literally just finished a grueling shift, was found raped and murdered inside the government-run R.G. Kar Medical College in Kolkata. This wasn't on some dark, isolated street. It happened inside the very hospital where she was supposed to be completely safe. This human tragedy sparked an immediate, intensely visceral reaction. Doctors all across India walked out. Nightly candlelight vigils and massive protests just flooded the streets of Kolkata. And then, 20 months later, this devastating loss evolved into a major political focal point when the victim's mother actually stepped forward to run for office.
But lingering over this tragedy are these massive, unresolved questions about state security. People are asking, how could this happen in a secured medical campus? Why was there such a delay in filing the initial FIR? And despite the massive public outcry, only one arrest was ever made. It was right in the shadow of this immense grief and outrage that the opposition BJP made an unexpected move. They fielded the victim's mother, Ratna Debnath, as their candidate in the Panihati constituency. Suddenly, women's safety wasn't just a talking point on a manifesto anymore, it became a literal face on the ballot box, a mother fighting for the justice the state had seemingly failed to provide. Now, carrying all that emotional weight, let's shift gears and look at the stark, data-driven realities of the election itself. Because when voting actually kicked off on April 23rd and 29th, amid clashes in places like Hooghly, Nadia, and North 24 Parganas, plus claims of EVM tampering, another massive controversy absolutely exploded.
Section 3. The Voter Roll Controversy.
9 million. That is the number of names deleted from Bengal's voter list by the Election Commission. To put that into perspective for a second, We're talking about nearly 12% of the entire electorate simply removed. In a fiercely contested election, a number this massive isn't just some administrative footnote. No way. It has the power to completely swing the entire outcome.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly who was caught up in this massive administrative review. Of the voters whose statuses were placed under review, roughly 65% were Muslim voters. Look, when demographics skew this heavily in a voter roll adjustment, it instantly becomes a massive flashpoint for intense political debate.
Which brings us right to the competing political agendas of the state and the opposition. We're going to present this exactly as it stands. The ruling TMC perspective is that this was a deliberate disenfranchisement of legitimate voters, specifically designed to suppress their base. On the flip side, the opposition BJP perspective argues that this was a totally necessary and long overdue cleaning up of bogus, fraudulent entries on the voter rolls. The courts are still examining the legality of all these deletions, but what's absolutely clear right now is that someone's not telling the whole truth, and millions of everyday citizens are just caught in the crossfire. But despite all the political maneuvering, the corruption allegations, the deleted names, and that heavy shadow of armed soldiers we talked about, we have to zoom in on the human element. We have to look at the will of the people, because what actually happened on voting day, that's something that absolutely cannot be faked.
Section 4. The Will of the People. 91%. That is the staggering voter turnout figure for this election. Remember those massive numbers we threw out earlier? 68 million voters, 350,000 soldiers? Well, 91% of that electorate actually stood up to be counted. A number this incredibly high, it doesn't just happen when a population is sitting back satisfied and comfortable. It happens when people are utterly, completely desperate to make their voices heard.
Because behind that massive 91% statistic are millions of real, individual human stories. It's the young engineer who took 3 different government exams, never got a single call letter, and still stood in line to vote. It's the woman doctor in Kolkata who stood holding a candle after the RG car murder, demanding safety, who showed up at the ballot box. It's the elderly man in a border district, literally standing in the pouring rain alongside armed soldiers, not even totally sure if his name was still on the voter list, but he queued up anyway. These aren't just data points on a chart, guys. They are citizens actively demanding accountability.
And so, now we wait for May 4th. Exit polls regarding the current situation project a historically close fight. I mean, some numbers are suggesting that the BJP might actually cross the halfway mark for the very first time in Bengal's history. But then other polls indicate that Mamata Banerjee's TMC might just manage to hold on to their 15-year rule. The margins here are razor thin, and the tension, it is absolutely palpable.
Which really leaves us with this final, essential question. Is change finally coming? Look, whatever the results show on May 4th, one thing is already undeniably clear. A state that required an actual army to hold an election. A mother who stepped up to the ballot box instead of suffering in silence. And 68 million people who stood in line despite all the fear and uncertainty, they've already sent a massive message. Bengal is no longer silent. So I really want to hear from you as we continue to cover this. Based on everything we've unpacked in this explainer today, do you think a fundamental shift is about to happen? Let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our follow-up on the results. And as always, keep questioning the world around you.